The results of November's election was disappointing for so many Americans, not just because of who won, but because of the harsh truth of what this says about us. For this episode of In Confianza, we gathered several members of the Pulso staff to have an honest conversation about our worries and fears about how this presidency may affect us, our communities, and the people we love. I'm Liz Rebecca, and this is In Confianza. So we're here, my fellow colleagues, in a new year, in 2025. Inauguration is upon us, and we have a new president. My first prompt for each one of you is in one word or in a couple of words. How are we feeling?
Exhausted.
Already?
I'll go with anxious.
Yeah, me too.
I'm feeling a mixture of I'm worried and I'm also feeling numb.
Those are two powerful words, Mark. I feel worried as well. And I also feel daunted, and that this is all so daunting, what lies ahead for us. It is more than one word, but there are so many feelings around the prospect of what is coming ahead. And the reason why I wanted us all to gather here and precisely talk about this moment is because when we're thinking about the content that we're creating in Pulso, and when we're thinking about our audience, we are often thinking really big, and we're thinking about this daunting task ahead of all of the good work we want to do to share and communicate with our audience, but we don't spend time thinking about ourselves as people enough and about our personal connection to the work and the storytelling that we do every day. And as you all prompted yourselves with these very first charged emotional words, I now want to go a bit deeper with each of you and ask what for you personally is causing these feelings. When you think of the next 4 years, how will this presidency affect you and yours? Sabrina, we'll start with you.
Well, there are two big things that I know I'm holding my breath about. The first is if gay marriage goes back to the States, because I live in Tennessee, and we were one of the original states fighting for the right for our marriage to be recognized. That's the case that went to the Supreme Court. We were part of that. And so I know what would happen to my marriage if that were the case. So that's the first big one. The second is whether or not the Department of Education really will be defunct. I have 4 children with disabilities, and all of the funding for disability education comes from federal government. So what will happen to them? Will they have access to free education? So yeah, those are the big things that I am concerned about.
You know, some light Sunday morning issues there, Sabrina.
Just, not a lot of
that's
happening
huge
over those things.
This is literally your livelihood. This is quite literally the safety of your children and the safety net of your partnership.
Absolutely.
I can't imagine. How about you, Mark?
Well, I'm mostly concerned about people in my life. There are so many things that will affect me, but will affect people that are in my life much worse. I think everything that is being proposed in terms of immigration reform is just, it's just so daunting to even think about it. Like Sabrina was saying, with whether it's gay marriage or LGBTQ advocacy, it's also very scary. I don't know how to put this into words. I'm also worried about sort of, number one, we yet again have been monolith to, the higher range of Latinos who voted for Trump in this presidency. And I'm not sure I can put into words what that feeling is that I have right now in terms of the worry there. Part of it is this sort of like cultural assimilation and this monolith thing that happens. And I think over time I'll figure that out. And the last thing is this is the only time in my life that I've actually been worried about. I've always been worried about global warfare affecting other people, but that we will start to feel the ripple effects of that on a national scale, and that could be attacks, or it could be us in alliance with dictator-based governments, in which we've been the enemy quite a few times in history, but this is just on a different scale that I'm thinking about. So yeah, it's a big bouillabaisse of fears that come up.
You just added a fear to my list I didn't even have, Mark.
Welcome.
So thank you. Now I have a new daunting next 4 years topic to put at the top of my list. You're so right. I hadn't even put that into my consciousness as we look ahead. But I also can imagine that being a Latino man right now, given how much Latino men have been part of the conversation the last several months in relation to this election, is also an extra burden to carry.
It's weird. I'm trying to figure out how I feel about all of it, but I think maybe some of the tough conversations demographically with Latino men that I will come across over the next few years, there may be a more positive side to that too, to really, really start having deeper conversations and seeing, asking people to the core what really matters to you. And are you paying attention to your voting decisions in what really matters to you? So, and I can't, it's so hard to answer that right now, but yeah.
A new thing to grapple with, along with the everyday challenges we're all facing. How about you, Kat?
My original answer was gonna be, I'm not necessarily worried for myself, because I think in many ways I'm very privileged in like where I live in the world. But after hearing some of y'all, I'm like reconsidering my answer, and I'm like, never mind, I'm super worried. I think maybe like generally I feel a lot of fear about like the economics of my future, and therefore as a result I'm really fearful of like not just for myself but for my parents, like what that's going to look like for me in 4 years, how this administration is going to affect them, and in turn affect me trying to help and support my parents as they're, now in an older age. But for the most part, I'm thinking about others. I'm thinking about folks that I know who are undocumented, folks who I know who are trans, even being in a queer relationship right now, I feel really fortunate to live somewhere where there isn't like I haven't experienced anything in terms of like homophobic remarks or anything like that, but I am thinking about folks who are living in other states who are going to feel the hatred as a result of this administration and what that's going to look like for them, and also the future generations, right? Like kids who are now like pushed back into the closet. Yeah.
There's so much there, Kat. I'm curious if your parents have shared the fears that you fear for them about their life with you.
They haven't articulated that. I have to say, my parents are very like, as folks who've had to struggle in many ways, financially, like emotionally, they're very like And this is just another day. Like, yeah, this is crazy, but let's keep it moving. Unfortunately, I kind of think like they come from maybe a more pessimistic perspective, where my perspective is like, no, this has to change. Like, I want better. And there's a possibility here. But I guess right now I'm just sitting with the feelings of allowing myself to feel, grief and frustration. And not that I want to give up, but I am giving myself an allotted amount of time to be like, I'm done. And I'll pick up when I have the energy again. I will pick things up, and I will have, the momentum to continue this fight in my own way. But for these next couple of, I don't know, days, weeks, maybe a month, who knows? I'm like, I'm done with this.
I was there too, Kat. I took the end of 2024 to really put everything in the world on pause. I didn't even really find out much of the major news stories that people in my life who are actually not really ever into the news would be telling me about. And just like you mentioned, it does take a certain level of privilege to be able to turn that off for a bit. And I told myself, okay, in 2025, we're going to come back full force and confront what's ahead. But it was so daunting to me when I realized the results that for my own mental health and personal sanity, I really took the end of the year to enjoy the holidays like anyone would hope you would be able to do when not faced with so many issues. So I can totally relate to that feeling of needing to turn off for yourself for a bit before coming back to the fight. There's so much here. I want to pass it now to you, Krista. How are things looking in your life?
I feel like I'm like Kat's parents, where my approach to life is like, I got to keep it moving. I think that's how I think I've been through too many things to allow myself to stop, honestly. But the two things that I am really worried about, similar to Kat, worried about my parents, my mom in particular. Until very recently, my mom wasn't a citizen. Both of my parents were permanent residents. My dad has been a permanent resident since he came to the U.S. when he was 3. And my mom came to the U.S. when she was 10, I think. So she was not always a permanent resident and then became one. And I've been really worried about what the administration's plans for permanent residents, for people who became citizens later on, for folks who are permanent residents with criminal records, because that impacts my family as well. Like, what does that mean? So that's been a big worry of mine. My mom became a citizen right before Thanksgiving, so that was a little bit of a relief for me. But, still.
That was such a touching moment. Yeah, what a touching moment, and what a good time of the year to feel that relief, Krista.
It was such a good time. It made Thanksgiving a lot better for sure. But, it's still a concern. Like, what if that's repealed? What can happen? There's a lot of possibilities and a lot of rumors and things going around that are not rumors, but things that have been said and published. And so still a worry, but definitely feeling a little bit of relief on that front. The other thing that I worry a lot about is myself in terms of healthcare. So I definitely remember the pre-Affordable Care Act days when you had to, prove that you deserved health insurance and submit transcripts to health insurance companies when you were a student in order to get health care. So I'm worried about that because I'm chronically ill. I have a kidney transplant. I, as a result of having a kidney transplant, deal with like a lot of other medical issues that come up from being immunosuppressed every day. And so I worry that I'm not going to have health care. And my insurance is expensive. My medication is really expensive. And my treatments are really expensive. And getting a transplant costs like $100,000. So I'm really worried about that. Prior to the Affordable Care Act, I had insurance as a kid. And then when you turn 18, you only got health insurance through your parents if you were a student. And I remember having to submit my transcripts like every quarter on the dot saying, yes, I am a student. Please don't drop me. Please keep insuring me. And then luckily, Affordable Care Act came to play. I think I just was at the right age at the right time. So I really didn't have to deal with it for that long. But I worry about that. And I think people maybe don't realize the extent to which that will impact folks, because people say, well, you can just have healthcare through your employer. But I mean, that's going to affect employer insurance as well. So I do worry about that. Something on my mind.
When I hear all of you all's worries and concerns, they're so directly linked to safety. You all are not talking about, the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're not even talking about self-actualization as much as your actual safety every day in your life in this country. Yes, Kai, you talked a bit about your economic future, but we're also talking about making rent every month, right? And having your parents have the basic needs to be well. Sabrina, you're talking about your children's well-being. Mark, you're talking about the sanctity of, again, physical safety of people you care about. And Krista, you're very much talking about your everyday well-being to be able to get what you need to be alive. I mean, we're talking about pretty existential things here. And as you all are mentioning this, the people in my life who come to mind are at the intersection of everything that you all have talked about. I'm most worried about my cousin who has TPS, who came here from Venezuela and was able to live a life here and contribute, not just to have a future here, but to give back to my family that's still in Venezuela. And she's queer. And so we're living in Florida, where we have a person with temporary status in basically the epicenter of the next 4 years. I mean, they may as well move the White House to Florida. Let's be honest. Like, I am living in the epicenter of everything that's going to come. And my family may very well be at risk in the same state they came to avoid risk and unsafety where they were previously. So it's like, right. And when I think of South Florida, a lot of people have this idea of South Florida of being this mecca of Latinidad, which it very much is in many ways. And now, people from our own community, I fear, are going to be harmful to others of us who don't think like them. So I worry about my personal safety in my own city, given how I voted and my thoughts and values, something I had never experienced in South Florida. Over the Christmas holiday, I was in a city a bit more north from Miami, and there was a trolley driving by with people decked out in their Christmas gear singing Feliz Navidad. And me and my family were singing Feliz Navidad with the Christmas trolley along with them. And the guy behind me started screaming and yelling at the trolley saying, "This is America. It's Merry Christmas," in my state. That is something that I would have never imagined happening here in a place that I assumed we were the majority, and that even though obviously Florida's always in the news sometimes for some of the wrong reasons, now I actually fear for my well-being here. So that very visceral feeling of your actual safety that we've all touched on is something that I had never even contemplated feeling for myself, feeling for the people in my life. And much like you were saying, Krista, everyone I love was not born here. I am the only person in my life who was born here. And so people with all sorts of mixed immigration statuses, even those who think that they are pretty safe from what's to come, may very well be affected. And I think that's the part, you all, that really sits with me. I want to take it back to you all and go back to you, Sabrina, to ask, how are you thinking about what to do next now after inauguration with some of the people in your own life who may not be feeling the same level of fear and to some extent grief that you're feeling?
Yeah, well, we actually were seriously looking at moving. And when it comes down to it, what is holding us back is the fact that some of the people around me, my children's father, for example, he does not feel the same lack of safety, right? So leaving the state would not be as beneficial to him. And yeah, that is one of the things that keeps me tied to Tennessee is that, you know, relationship I have with my children's father, which is very important. And, you know, they have a fabulous relationship with him. So it's weird to have, in some ways, my safety tied to this other person I am no longer married to. But, you know, the reality is he is a straight white man in Tennessee who has a network here, who has friends and family. And I don't blame him for not wanting to leave all of that. But that does mean that, in a sense, I am stuck where I live because of that. So that's probably like the biggest thing as far as somebody around me who doesn't fully understand and cannot fully understand. And also just friends. You know, like I said, living in Tennessee is an interesting experience, I think, much like you, Liz, with your relationship with Florida. I have a love-hate relationship with my state. And a lot of the people that I'm friends with who love me and are close to me don't always understand how living here impacts me. Just because it doesn't affect them in the same way, because they don't have those same barriers.
Does that apply to you, Mark, in a state like New York, in such a different context than Tennessee?
I was over the summer. I did a residency in a small town in Minnesota, and 1,000 people. It's like 1,000 or 1,100 people, very small. And so, like a rural community, it's fairly conservative. That's just par for the course. And a bunch of the people that were running the residency, a few of them apologized to me about all the Trump flags. And I said, it's okay. I said, but I see them in New York. And I live in a southern, and they said, no, that's not true. I said, yeah, it's true. Like there's a lot of Republicans, there are a lot of Trump fans all around the country, including what we think is this, you know, this euphoric place of the melting pot. And I live in a southern part of Brooklyn, which is really integrated and very beautiful, but very red. Very in terms of the polling averages, it votes right wing. The thing that I keep thinking about, I live in Bay Ridge, and I take long walks up Fifth Avenue into Sunset Park. And for those that know it or don't know it, Sunset Park is, you know, it was traditionally a Puerto Rican community. Now it's a mixed Latino community, lots of Central Americans there. And I've been taking these walks and going, will I see all these vendors in the next few years? Will I see all of this life? I love Sunset Park. I think part of the reason I love it is because it's its thing, and it doesn't have the same visual ripple effects that gentrification has hit in so many different cities. And that's the first thing that comes to mind is like, that's the worry, is not just the selfish things of like, oh, I've got great places to eat there, I hope they don't go away. But the actual, you know, what you want in a city and a community of like, I want to hear the kids, I want to hear the people, I want to see these weird conversations that people are having. I don't know demographically all those people there, but I assume whether it's legal status that they're here, whether they're undocumented, there's a lot of people in a city like New York that potentially get affected. And so there's some comfort I have in terms of state rights and the ways that state will self-legislate, but all these mandates that are being proposed and the way that so much of the populace seem to be like, yeah, we're okay with that. Get rid of people. that will affect things. And of course, I just get on my diatribe going, even just thinking selfishly, even if you voted that way, even if you don't care about people and people being displaced or being told to leave or being removed, you realize that the economy is going to get fucked and you're going to have to pay more for things, right? Like, you realize that too.
But a lot of people don't.
They don't.
A lot of people don't.
And that's why I almost want to like just talk to most people in a selfish way, saying, even if you are concerned, like your main concern is prices and things like that, which I don't discount. You know, we all have a lot of financial hardships, and any things that we can do to mitigate that don't hurt the majority of people. You know, we want to be able to take care of ourselves and our families. But that's a thing that I just wish more people understood. But this is a tactic that's been used for forever in terms of blaming and placing blame. That's my diatribe. That's really what comes to mind when I think about being here, and how that enforcement will affect a place like New York City.
Well, let's go from New York now to Puerto Rico, another fascinating place. And interestingly, Kat, as you were telling us at the end of last year and really during election time, that was actually having elections at the same time as we were here on the mainland. And so now that results are in, and now that Puerto Rico has in many ways chosen the path that the mainland has with how folks voted, how are you feeling about the context of the island and what everything will look like in the next 4 years?
You know, for context, I'm not Puerto Rican, but I have been on the island back and forth from New York and Puerto Rico for 5 years, and have been here for some heavy political moments, like the Ricky Rosselló protest. And I felt like as a non-Puerto Rican, I felt really, really inspired by that movement. You know, the Ricky Rosselló protest was, you know, during the summer, and it was almost like a week-long people hitting the streets. And and by people, I mean, it's not just the youth. It was, you know, older people. Everyone was looking out for one another. There was such a commitment. You saw a lot of like change, like the mentality of a lot of people who really swore by the established party, and like, hey, even if people were like pro-state, or just keeping things neutral as they are, you saw the mentality of a lot of locals here on the island start to change. So fast forward now, 2024, you know, the elections were happening, and you saw, I was re-inspired again, because this new party, right, that was focused more on like a independent party, there was large crowds, you know, we just saw a lot of, on social media, there was a lot of buzz. It was very similar what was happening with Kamala too, you know, like there was a lot of engagement from the youth. And so personally speaking, I felt like the day of the elections, I was like, okay, we're going to win one. Right?
Because it was in the air. It was in the air.
Something's gonna happen, you know. Like, if we don't get the states, then at least like Puerto Rico is gonna get the win, and there's gonna be a lot of momentum, and that's gonna reinvigorate people. And I woke up the next day, and both lost. I will say, it's not a total loss, because I think the momentum that has happened here in Puerto Rico is one where it was very close. I don't want to get into the details of like, you know, the robbery and scamming and whatnot, but
that's for another podcast.
It was a very, very close race. And more than anything, I think people really saw that like, oh, wait, it's possible. Like, we can actually change this long-standing party that has been here forever. We can shake things up. It actually is possible. So I will say being here on the island and seeing the vigor of everyone, the enthusiasm, even though we quote unquote lost, it still does inspire me to like keep going. And I almost want, my hope, Liz, quite honestly, was that Puerto Rico was going to win. We were going to have like a new party in place, and that it would have been a learning lesson for the States. That honestly was like, I was like, okay, if we lose in the States, this is what's going to happen. Yet again, Puerto Rico is going to lead with like this social change, right? And I still have hopes that's going to happen. Maybe not now, but in the near future.
Oh, I'm so sorry for your losses, Kat. Just to hear you take us on this hopeful and dreadful roller coaster of a journey, remembering too Perreo Combativo and all of that imagery from that moment to your point, like seeing from afar and hearing from you some of that energy come back with so much hope. All is not lost, as you say, for sure. The seeds have been planted, even here with so much that started and that will, of course, reverberate now as a consequence to this moment. That hopeful part will come, and yet the loss still stings because the future of Puerto Rico is not prioritized by those who have the power to change it here on the mainland as much as it should be. And it's just always so devastating to just continue to witness the colonial relationship that exists with mainland and the island. So seguiremos viendo qué pasa. Now let's end the tour in DC. How is the nation's capital feeling, Krista? You know, a bastion of blue, usually, now seeing the return of Trump 2.0.
You know, DC did what it needed to do in the election. I'll say that. But unfortunately, we only have 3 electoral votes. I feel like everyone always wants to know what the nation's capital is thinking. And I mean, it's super relevant in this case, for sure. Probably the largest sentiment of locals is like, we're going to have Trump supporters coming back to the city with their big trucks and the signs. And we had to deal with like tourists making their way uptown instead of staying downtown by the White House. And that's going to be annoying. That's like the initial reaction. But a lot of worry that I have living in DC, which is not a state, as hopefully everyone knows, is that is home rule. So up until now, DC has pretty much governed itself, and with occasional interference from Congress, depending on what we were trying to do. So when we attempted to legalize marijuana, Congress stepped in and said, no, DC, you can't do that. So I don't know. I think a lot of people don't realize that the laws that we can pass depend on Congress and whether they feel like interfering with us or not. But for the most part, DC has been able to have home rule. It's not a secret that Trump hates DC. Republicans hate DC. The administration hates DC. And so I really worry that this city, which, as you said, Liz, it's a bastion of blue. It's a super progressive city, is going to suffer a lot. And that makes me really sad. We have a lot of really great laws here and programs and protections. It's probably one of the best places I've ever lived in terms of quality of life and programs that we have, whether it's empowering kids to make medical decisions, which is something that we did during COVID, where teenagers up to a certain age could seek out like the COVID vaccine without their parents needing to approve it. We have some of the most like expansive reproductive rights laws in the country, I think, meaning that women can access those services up until birth. And we have a lot of different programs like that. Childcare, we have so many parks, we have great parks and rec. And it makes me so sad to think of what the city is going to turn to. And I think, people think of DC as this swamp with concrete buildings where the federal government works or operates, but there are 700,000 residents here that live here and make this city really great. So I'm really sad about that.
As a former DC resident, a piece of my heart is always there, and I feel that sadness with you, Krista, because it really is such a fantastic place to be and live, and locals really in any administration feel the brunt of the bad. And to your point, the heart and soul of the real DC just may not be what it was. So I'm sad for that too. Well, I feel similar to you around don't mess with Florida. Only I can mess with Florida because I'm in Florida and I can say things about Florida, but don't talk about my state because it's my state. Florida gets so much side eye, and deservedly so, because we're problematic. But we also have real people living here every day who are fantastic and amazing. And something that we always say in South Florida is that we are the future of what the United States will inevitably look like. And so to discount the real people who are going to live here and the real work being done to combat what happens in the HQ of the extreme right is also something that I defend often. And then when I think more about my county specifically, I live in Miami. We're Miami-Dade County, more broadly, a compilation of 32 smaller cities and municipalities. And I'm very proud to say that we just inaugurated for a second term the very first woman mayor who is a Democrat in our city. And so that is really exciting. She, in my opinion, has done a fantastic job. She is a former nonprofit founder, and so she's really about the people, and she has so much love from so many communities who she was serving for 20 years before being a politician. And I'm really excited to just continue to see her lead and to protect all of the wonderful things to combat climate change that were started here in my county, and to improve public transit, which is notoriously bad in South Florida. And so in as much as she can, with now all Trump Republicans leading alongside her after this election, it will be hard. She's gonna have a tough time to continue to safeguard all the things that were started to improve our county, but there is some hope there that she'll be able to still keep the civility that I fear will be lost in my state overall alive and well, and that Miami can be that example for what I fear may not be the case in the rest of Florida. So don't mess with Florida. Only I can mess with Florida, but I understand that Florida is Florida. We've been talking so much about the things that worry us, you all, and what lies ahead for ourselves, for our people, for our states. I'm curious how you all have been managing that grief as you start this new year. And to go back to how you ended, Kat, what makes you hopeful as we look ahead? What about starting with you, Mark, this time?
Well, there are a few things, and I'm actually going to go back to the DC conversation as to point to this. I grew up in the DC area, and I lived there as an adult for a while. And when Trump was first elected, I was living where I live now. I was living in New York, and I talked to friends about it, and sharing some worries and things like that. DC resident friends, and they reminded me of something which I just had neglected thinking about. They go, when a more conservative whatever government comes into DC, the city is actually filled with the advocates. So people come to fight it. And I go, oh, that's right. And Krista, like you were saying, you have to deal with the uptown, the folks coming uptown that are there for the inauguration or whatever it is. And you just go, oh man. But I was reminded of those conversations I had with friends, DC being a microcosm of sort of like a bigger thought that I had of there are going to be versions of activism that we haven't seen in a while. There have to be. And I think that when something shifts so markedly to a direction, it means there's been progress. There's been threatening progress on the other side. And I don't want us to forget that. And while rights and things like that can continue to get taken away, that's what we're scared about. The amount of progress that a large amount of people over the last 20 years have been fighting for and have made happen, that's not going away. And so this is part of what's happening is this is a reaction to that progress. And then the other side is there's going to be fighting to swing it, just sort of like, oh, y'all want to fuck with us? Oh, just you wait and see, what we're going to put forward. And I'm really hopeful for that. The other thing that I'm hopeful for, kind of joking, not joking, and I think I might have mentioned this to you, Liz, is I'm making this, I keep fantasizing. The thing that has helped me is fantasizing that this administration will be like a slumber party with all the popular girls from like, it's just that weren't ever in the same room together. And they are going to be within an hour just hating each other. And so many of them are going to be calling mommy to pick them up. Elon is going to be like, I want to come back to X. I'm tired of this. Like they're just the egos and the priorities and the vanity that is, and also the ineptitude. Nobody wants to do the work. No, like government isn't fun. It's not fun. And say what you will about past administrations. Past administrations at least were mostly filled with people that knew how to do the work, wanted to do the work, could take a while. And so I'm just, my BALM for myself is I think I just fantasize. I have this like bubble up on my head of this slumber party where Trump is the queen bee, and then somebody else is trying to be the queen bee, and, somebody gets asked to leave, and then somebody spills, oh, sorry, I spilled a drink on you. I'm so sorry.
You'll be watching Sitting Pretty while everything burns, eating your pupusa in Sunset Park, just waiting for the top leadership to crumble. Wow.
That's my fantasy. I know it will still suffer from it, but there is at least things not getting done is better than what's being proposed. And so that at least is why I have that fantasy.
I mean, that sounds super hopeful to me, Mark. Like, I'm jumping on that fantasy bandwagon. That makes me hopeful. Just hearing you be hopeful about it, I hadn't thought about it, and I'm going to add it to my hopeful list now after listening to you. What makes you hopeful, Sabrina?
I mean, dealing with the grief, I went on vacay, to be honest.
Yes, you rode some roller coasters.
Did some escapism, a little bit of healthy escapism, so I could come back and fight the fight. And I think, honestly, that is also what makes me hopeful, is that knowing there are people like me in states like mine that are working and living here. And, earlier, Liz, you said about, living in Florida, it's what the future of the U.S. looks like. And I was born in New York, raised in Miami, moved to Tennessee when I was a teenager. And there are so many people right now growing up in places like Florida, growing up in cities, who are going to move out into the world, into the U.S., and bring a lot of things with them. And I know because that's part of what I did. And that makes me hopeful. And I think also knowing how many people who are younger, who are growing up in conservative homes, because I actually did grow up in a very conservative home, who grew up with their own opinions. And I think we are just in the beginning stages of seeing what the youth can do. And I think, we saw in this election with Kamala, like, we saw just a bit of possibility there. And I think over the next 4 years, we're going to see that strengthen. And that's my hope. And yeah, Mark, also, I'm going to add your little fantasy into mine as well.
And you, Kat, what makes you hopeful? And how are you dealing with it all to keep that hope alive?
Mark just gave me hope. And by hope, I mean, like, I do feel the darkness of it all, and it feels very heavy, and so much is looming over us that I also feel like it's such a moment for laughter, like laughing through the pain. There's some weird humor wrapped up in all of this. And then the other thing is just community, who we select to create community with. That's all we really have in these moments, is like, I try to take deep breaths and not think about the larger picture, but like, okay, let me connect with those that I actually have around me. So I'm thinking of like Friendsgiving was so beautiful to host in my apartment with my girlfriend and like feed people these delicious meals that I, spent so much time making and playing games and just allowing us moments of like joy, right? So much of this becomes so heavy, and I think we can lose ourselves. So trying to maintain, and not maintain, but actually intentionally create moments and events of joy with the people that I love the most. That is what's giving me hope. And then from a like professional stance and from like a creative stance, what a great opportunity to think creatively of like how to speak to our audience for the next 4 years. As someone who has created content in front and behind the camera specifically for a Latine community, the work continues, but now I feel like, I don't know, maybe it's a double-edged sword of sorts, that we are really like in the limelight. Like, I'm noticing like traditional media is talking about us in a way that I feel there's a lot more importance and value on than ever before, So for me, it's a great opportunity to ideate of like, okay, how do we captivate our own people, in particular now with this bigger emphasis on where the psychology of our people is at. So it's a great creative prompt.
I love that. And to do it with joy will sustain the hope through this next era, Kat. And you, Krista?
Well, I have a therapist, so she's been holding me down the last 4 or 5 years, and I will continue seeing her through this next 4 years. But aside from that, I think it's a little bit of what you all said. To Mark's point about DC and advocates, I think the other thing that I was really reminded of this election season is that DC and LA, where I'm from, both have really strong grassroots organizing of people who are from those places. So like, yes, a lot of advocates come to DC, a lot of advocates will go to major cities, but there's also a lot of people from here that were born here who have had generations here, and same in LA. people like my mom and some of my other family members who do like labor organizing or educational grassroots organizing or political organizing. And so it makes me feel better that I know they're already in action. I think they deserve rest too, but I know that they are already in action, and that makes me feel better. And I think as far as joy, which is the other thing I wanted to highlight, I think the ability, Liz, you said this recently in a meeting, but we were talking about the ability to live an intentional life. And that has really stuck with me ever since you said it. And I think it's related to joy. And I feel a little bit better. And it's definitely a privilege knowing that I've been able to build my life in such a way where I can contribute to this fight in different ways. Even if I can't, physically be at a protest, maybe I can do something else. But I'm also able to do what I want still. So far, they haven't limited my ability to do what I want. And that feels good. And I think that a lot of people should feel empowered by that. I'm hopeful that I'm seeing comments online and in social media about people finally learning what the phrase "fuck around and find out" means. Like, people are feeling motivated to fight. Like, that makes me feel, I don't know if great is going to be what I'm saying, but better, hopeful, joyful. So that's where I'm at right now.
I take a bit of each one of the things you all said as I think of my own processing of this all and what's next. I'll add that I wouldn't be a mom of a toddler if I didn't say my daughter gives me hope. She really does. And just thinking about her now, I got teary-eyed of, there is a possibility of creating a better future for her. And that motivates me every day to leave her a world where she can thrive and live that intentional life, Krista. I also get hope from the many people in my life who voted for this current president. I know that the mandate for the hateful things that this administration stood for is actually not there. I am sure that most people who, even within our own lives, like it is in my case, within the Pulso audience, who feel like this change was necessary to see improvement in their own lives, do not overwhelmingly believe that that should happen at the cost of so much harm and damage. They may F around and find out, but I am truly of the mindset that we all really do want to overwhelmingly see that progress that we started building, that you all have touched on through the advocates that are going to go to DC, and to the people like you, Sabrina, in Tennessee, and to the people who inspired you, Kat, in Puerto Rico, and to the locals who are holding it down in DC, Krista. And I've seen it from the people in my own life who, yes, maybe truly don't think that it's going to be that bad, but who fundamentally I've seen have values of respect for others and equity and dignity for people, that if they see that truly not being the case in these next 4 years, will join us in the fight to fight back. So that keeps me hopeful. And working with all of you, it sounds so cheesy, but I really feel so much admiration and love for each and every one of you, and the work that we're going to be able to do together to bring that hope that we're feeling here to our content and to our audience and to our community on Pulso across everywhere we communicate with them. I know we're going to be in community with each other as we do that, and I know that we're going to do the best that we can from our heart to meet people where they're at, Kat, like you're saying, and to accompany them in what is to come in these next 4 years, while we also help protect them from the things that we cannot change, but that we can combat together. So it gives me hope to be doing work that is fulfilling and purposeful alongside each one of you all at a time where our community will need us most. Are there any last final messages that you all want to leave to the Pulso audience as we close out this episode in this season that will be all about dealing with grief?
I don't know who said this. I'm really bad with quotes, but it's not mine, but it's something along the lines of like, grief is an extension of the love that you have for someone. And so as I'm grieving like this political loss, I know that that grief comes from a lot of love for my community, for my larger community. And by that, I mean for just like Latinos as a whole. And I just want people to like remember that the grief is not just sadness, but it actually comes from a deep appreciation and love and compassion for folks.
100%, Kat. 100%.
I think mine is talk to your friends and family. To Kat's point about building community, I think that although I felt a little bit ragey post-election, and a lot of that was directed at my own family members who I know perhaps have different views than I do, I think that also, that my surprise at that situation highlighted to me like, wow, I really need to have actually more conversations with maybe some of my extended family members that I don't always think about, or like the older uncles in my family, cousins who are men. There's a theme here for sure for myself, but it did make me realize like there are a lot of people in my family and friend circle, particularly men, that maybe I haven't had certain types of conversations with. And so I think that we should all, it sounds so cheesy, we should all check in on each other more often, but community is really important. And I think we need to invest in that more.
I want to jump off that because I think I think that, and Kat, what you said, spot on. And I'm more implored with this election versus 2016 to very earnestly do a lot more listening. And I was surprised by my reaction at this point. We're nearing the end of the year, that I actually have more empathy for people I didn't 8 years ago who might have been the electorate. And also, I've been able to see, yes, there's racism, sexism, all those things exist. And there are people that are motivated to vote based on that. I still, and this goes back to something you were saying earlier, Liz, I still think people want to do the right thing. And quite often, all of us, every single human being is motivated by first, like the airplane instruction, put on your oxygen mask first before you apply it to anybody else. And while good in principle, that can often blind us from the ripple effects of taking care of ourselves. But when it comes down to it, most of us are dealing with medical debt, student debt. We are not...
the price of eggs, for as much as there's so many memes around it, yeah. there's a there.
You know, can't find work, our kids, elder care, all these sorts of things. And I'm trying to understand how we can all talk to each other. Again, Krista, with what you were saying about not being cheesy, but if it is a cheesy impulse, so be it. But a way that we can understand people that we're disagreeing with, fight like hell, and find the ways to hear and have compassion for what people's needs are, even if they're voting differently than us, and hopefully sway them down the road.
Do you want to take us home, Sabrina?
Oh, that's responsibility right there. I think, going off a bit of what Mark said, seeing that we all want what's best for ourselves and our families, and understanding that that is a common ground that we all have. And maybe my goal in the next 4 years is to get some people to understand that getting the best thing for you doesn't need to come at the expense of people like me and my family. We can both and this, right? I know, Liz, that's your favorite.
My favorite phrase.
So we can both and, my kids can have the education they need without taking, some people feel that, disabled children take away sometimes from typical education, and that doesn't have to be the case. And so how do we work together? How do we make that happen so that everybody is taken care of in this country? I think that is going to be the key to, moving on and moving towards policies that actually help everybody, and maybe getting away from some of the partisanship that is so relevant and right now. I think we can do that by seeing that we all want what's best for each other in our own ways. So hope that brings it home.
And that's a wrap. Thank you all so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.